Thank you very much. I noticed that earlier on, the word courage was mentioned in connection with behaving in a trustworthy manner in research. And I think that's quite an accurate term to use in relation to behaving ethically nowadays. It seems it is important that people show courage in order to resist temptation. But before I move on to my slides, let me tell you a short story to illustrate what basically has been said about education in research ethics and integrity. And this story goes back to long ago in Asia, about a young boy, a young man actually, whose father has just died. This boy's father was at that time one of the best swordsmen in Asia. So when the father died, it was expected that the young man would follow in his footsteps. And as was the practice at that time, he was sent to live with a master, a teacher in swordsmanship. So he packed his things and went to this master's house. And one of the things that he asked the master right away was, "Master, how long will it take me before I learn to become a good swordsman?" And the master said, "Well, about 5 years." And the young man said, 5 years? How can it take so long?" And the master replied, "Well, in that case, it's going to take you 10 years. 10 years? First you said 5 years and I complained, and now you say it's going to take even longer." And the master said, "Well, in that case, it's going to take 15 years. And the young man was about to complain again, but of course he realized what might happen if he did. So he just shut up and started to live with his master. So he lived with his master to start learning to become a swordsman. And he was wondering after a few days why the master had not started teaching him. So after 1 week or 2 weeks, he went back to the master and said, "Master, when are you going to start teaching me how to become a good swordsman?" And the master said, "Have you finished your dinner? Have you finished eating?" And the young man said, "Yes, master." The master said, "Then go wash the dishes." Of course, he was perplexed. He didn't know what was going on. But remembering what happened when he was complaining about the teaching methods of the master, he went on and washed the dishes. One day while he was washing the dishes, the master crept from behind him and started hitting him with a stick. And of course he was hurt. And he asked the master, "Master, why did you do that to me?" And the master didn't say anything. But that went on for weeks and weeks. And after some time, he thought, "I might as well be ready with my own stick." And the next time that the master crept from behind to hit him with the stick, he parried the master with that stick. And that exercise went on and on for a few more weeks, and in a short while, this young man had become the greatest swordsman in that part of Asia. Now, I told you that story because I think it illustrates the way ethics teaching has to be done. It involves, as Professor Wang told us earlier on, being taught about character not by way of lessons in school necessarily, but by way of living correctly. And that is basically what this presentation basically is all about. But let me move on to this slide by C.P. Snow, or coming from C.P. Snow's book, The Search, where he says, the only ethical principle which has made science possible is that the truth shall be told all the time. This presentation is about that. The basic principle when we talk about research ethics and integrity is that the truth needs to be told all the time. After all, science is about the search for truth, and if you are searching for truth, then that is the basic thing that everyone, every member of the scientific community is searching for. And Snow continues, a false statement of fact made deliberately is the most serious crime a scientist can commit. And if that were so, then we see the importance of trust, which should be and is the foundation of science and scientific discovery. But not too long ago, then President of Harvard University, Derek Bok, wrote an article entitled, Can Ethics Be Taught? That's what we're supposed to be talking about right now. Well, the Zen master in the story told us how to teach ethics, in effect. But after asking that question, can ethics be taught? Bok actually went on to say, or to give a number of reasons why it cannot be taught. And one of the reasons is that it does not pay. For many people, it does not pay to be ethical because, well, they know what can happen. They know how to earn things. And one of his teachers during that time, one of the teachers at his school said, students seem to see things in cost-benefit terms all the time. So instead of just saying lying is wrong, they have to consider, will the lie serve as a good policy? What are the chances of getting caught? If you get caught, how much will it hurt you? So one of the reasons why people think ethics cannot be taught. Then also some say, well, it cannot be taught because it gets in the way of results. If you're in medical practice, you know how important it is that medicine should be on its way all the time. So the cure that people are looking for must be on its way and quickly. But if you're ethical, sometimes it gets in the way of medicine achieving its objectives, and they think that's wrong. No, it hinders research. If you're so truthful, you cannot progress as quickly in research. And some people think research ethics could be bad for mental health. And no, there are so many interests pushing us to move quickly in different directions. I was going to, I'm sorry about this, I was going to develop this topic some more, but I thought in the interest of time, I won't do that right now. But I will go on to talk a bit about conflicts of interest, because conflicts of interest are one reason why it is so difficult to teach research ethics. But what I want to talk about conflicts of interest is the dynamics. When we think that people are doing something wrong, we always think, oh, they are doing it, not me. But that's wrong. Let's see how conflicts of interest works, as proven by a lot of empirical research concerning the mechanics of conflicts of interest. For instance, one finding is that physicians who attended grand rounds given by a pharmaceutical company speaker are always more likely to prescribe that company's drug, even if many of them did not recall which company actually sponsored the grand rounds. So it has its way of taking charge, even if you're not aware of it. And if you ask physicians, what do the physicians say? No, I am not affected by conflicts of interest. I'm too objective to be affected. Isn't that what we all think? And we say, oh, but other physicians are affected by conflicts of interest in their decisions. Not me, but they. And the patients are on their side. The patients say, other physicians are affected by conflicts of interest, but my own physician is not. So biases are plenty, and self-interest distorts the way that people weigh arguments. And bias arising from conflicts of interest is strong even where the studies have only small stakes. So, according to this empirical research, limiting gift size is not likely to eliminate bias. If you want to limit it to ballpoint pens and writing pads or prescription pads, it does not work because conflicts of interest still will affect your judgment. And individuals are not aware of their bias even when they are taught and told about it. And one of the ways it does is through systematic bias for company funding of research. When you make an inappropriate selection of a comparator to the product being investigated, or when the publication is later on written. Just an illustration of what conflict of interest means, and an enumeration of some primary interests that should be more important really, but which are often overtaken and superseded incorrectly by profit to the sponsors, by bonuses, rebates, consultancy fees, or even by the temptation of research grants, laboratory equipment, or administrative fees going to hospitals and research institutions. Or some non-monetary considerations like promotion, prestige, and pride. Anyway, the whole point behind is the idea that the good guys are not always as good as they seem, even if that good guy seems to be me. We have to accept that we all need being reminded. We should not mind it if there are ethics committees around us who have to remind us that this is not the way to proceed, or that the other way is what is correct. And one of the ways in which conflicts of interest have crept in is in the matter of ghost writing. A few years ago, there was this headline that medical papers by ghost writers had been written in order to push hormone replacement therapy. And this happened in the matter of guest authorship and ghostwriting in publications related to rofecoxib. So what happens is review manuscripts were often prepared by unacknowledged authors. Actually, people from pharmaceutical companies were doing the writing and subsequently attributed authorship to academically affiliated investigators who often did not disclose industry financial support. So we then ask, well, shouldn't we avoid at least deception? Can deception be avoided? I give this next example, this case study, just to illustrate how some people might try to avoid deception. In this particular case of authorship, Dr. S is a surgeon who is expected to contribute tissue to be used as samples for a research project. He is engaged by the investigators when the study was already going on. So he could excise tissue to the team's specifications. Now he knows one of the outputs of the research team is a publication reporting outcome of the procedures involving collected tissue samples. And the surgeon requests that he be listed as an author of the article to be submitted for publication. So there was a lot of discussion concerning the propriety of having him listed as one of the authors. And if you go by the criteria for publication coming from the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, since he would not have satisfied all three of the main requirements, then he would not have been qualified as an author. But the solution in that case would have been, well, it would have been tempting in recognition of the importance of his contribution for this person to have been recognized as an author. But that would not have been truthful. That would not have been truthful because he would not have satisfied these requirements. So the proper thing to do would have been to involve him from the beginning as a collaborator in the project. What I'm saying is that there are no shortcuts, but there are ways of avoiding the lack of truthfulness in a situation of that sort. Sometimes it is tempting also to get involved in deception, thinking that it is necessary for a research project to be carried out, as in this particular example, about negotiating safe sex practices. This was a study to determine whether and how women in the sex trade try to convince their male partners to use a condom. So the idea was to help reduce the incidence of HIV/AIDS in the population of men who were, not only men, but women, of course, who were engaged in this practice. And Dr. J, the anthropologist, was concerned that if they were upfront, if they were truthful all the way to the women, then they would not get frank answers from the women that they wanted to study. So they thought participant observation was necessary, but use deception. Researchers were to pose as male customers who casually met women in one of the venues to negotiate for sex. They would then ask the women how, why, and with whom they bartered casual sex, and interview them further on the method in which they tried to convince the partners to use a condom. But they would later on find a way to escape without having to engage in sex, of course. The Ethics Committee thought the methodology provided a good opportunity to gain valuable insights and provide a good basis for policy making, but that the women had to be paid for their time and for the time that it took them to make the decision and the contribution that they made to the research. Okay? They thought, okay, it's okay to deceive them. But when this was submitted to a peer reviewer for publication, the peer reviewer objected. He said, well, you cannot publish this because the research that you did was founded on a lie. It was founded on deception. So the question that was posed to the team then was, were they justified in doing research founded on deception? Well, it would make good discussion for us here, but we don't have time for that. And, well, I'll say something more about this later on, but it gives us an example of a case where one might properly ask, isn't ethics in this case getting in the way of reproductive health? Aren't we being unethical by being too ethical in this case? And I refer now to a book by Sisla Bock, the wife actually of Derek Bock, whom I referred to earlier on. A book about lying, and he says basically in that book, no to lying. Trust and integrity are precious resources, easily squandered and hard to regain. They can thrive only on a foundation of respect for veracity. So the idea is, if you have an example of a research project like that, can you prevent being unethical without preventing research altogether? Preventing research done unethically is not the same as preventing research altogether. Preventing unethical research is only an intermediate step, and one must proceed to find ways of conducting that particular research, for example, ethically. And there have been a number of suggestions. Let me just mention one particular suggestion in this case, which was, well, if you were going to try to deceive the women, why not do it in this manner? You approach the women, say 2 months in advance of the research, and tell them, look, within the next 2 months, we are going to send interviewers to ask you questions. They are going to pretend to be customers, but actually they are not customers. But they will interview you, they will not tell you who they are, and they will not tell you exactly when they will go. So, in effect, you're telling them, we will be trying to deceive you in this way, and then we will not tell you, when we approach you, we will not tell you who we are, but later on you will find out exactly what happened. Now, that's a difficult way of doing it, but the point is that there are so many temptations to deceive if you are a researcher. There are so many occasions that tell you maybe this is an example of an exception that may be allowed. But there are just too many of those. And the best way to deal with the exceptions is to try to eliminate them, reduce them at least in number. And for every justification that you think is valid in order to deceive or in order to lie, try to find the counter reason not to lie. Just make that effort. Ethics and integrity is about that. Be creative in finding non-deceptive alternative methodologies. Of course, there are many examples that we know of how deception by falsification or fabrication has been perpetrated. And unfortunately, in this example, the person being mentioned comes from the university where I also come from now. And this is a recent development. And the university, the National University of Singapore, of course, is right to come up and say, reputation of the university itself is not tarnished because it is doing everything it can to unearth the truth. And as a matter of fact, apart from doing the investigation, has moved for the retraction of the articles published earlier. But there are other examples that we can see. And I will not go deeply into these anymore. You have the example of the Vice-Chancellor of Monash University. He was Vice-Chancellor of the university at the time that his plagiarisms were unearthed. So it was not just one or two cases, more cases of plagiarism than that. So he had to resign because of the discovery. And here are some quotations from the Times Higher Education Supplement at that time. Some comments published in that supplement. For universities to be seen as public institutions worthy of financial support, their leaders must comply or must come up with reputations of the highest integrity. And the reiteration of the first point we made, the whole academic project depends on honesty. How else can the public trust the results of research? And this is another example. I thought I'd share this example because the person involved was even a Nobel Prize winner. I think he was a bit lucky in that the misrepresentation was unearthed when he was dead already, so he couldn't worry about his reputation anymore, but his grandchildren would have had to. And it was, in a way, a minor case of misconduct because it did not affect the nature of the truth that he had sought to establish. And then you have the example of this person. How many remember his name? But how many remember where he comes from? How many remember his nationality? Earlier on, there was reference to the example from South Korea. We don't remember his name, but we remember where he comes from. What disservice we are doing to our institutions and to our country when we commit a misconduct of this sort. And let me offer a partial explanation for that. Translational research. I'm not saying translational research is wrong. That is an effort, I think, that we all feel obliged to contribute to. From bench, so the slogan goes, to bedside. We forget the bank, to the bank. Okay. That's That's what many people are looking for, isn't it? It's not just from bench to bedside, but from bench to bedside to bank. And sometimes what it does is it encourages us to do research based on desired outcomes. We know what the outcome has to be. So when we do research, we think we succeed only when we get to that outcome, even if that outcome is wrong. That's not the way to do research. It has to be based on what the evidence dictates, rather than what we want the outcome to be, even when it sometimes hurts. And I say deception is worse than coercion. Sometimes we talk about paternalism. The Asian society is quite well known for paternalism, for being deceptive to patients. We want to protect patients from the truth. But paternalism can be justified only when it is exercised over subjects for their own good. And a reminder of what was said earlier, when tempted to deceive, look for alternative honest ways to get results. And we need to be reminded, so we need independent oversight and advice. I will skip this and move on to the last slide. I say, in an imperfect world, deception cannot be wiped out altogether, but it can be minimized and defeated with enough honest persons. And I hope in this room there are enough honest persons to enjoy a good day.